In the dust and fire of the ancient world, there was a place where courage was not a choice, it was the only way to live. A place where boys were torn from their mothers and forged into warriors before they could even call themselves men. That place, a broken bar, was Sparta. Long before the word soldier carried pride, before the world spoke of honor in battle, there were the Spartans, a men whose very existence was defined by the art of war. Their story has been told in fragments, romanticized in films, glorified in legend. But behind the myth lies something far more brutal, far more human, the untold story of the Spartan warriors. The city of Sparta lay in the southern heart of Greece, in the land of Laconia. Unlike the marble temples of Athens or the lively markets of Corinth, Sparta was not built for beauty or trade. It was built for survival. From the moment a Spartan child took his first breath, his life was not his own. It belonged to the state, to the warrior code, to the endless pursuit of perfection through pain. When a child was born, he was inspected by the elders. If the infant showed weakness, deformity, or fragility, he was cast aside, left to die in the wild. It was cruel, yes, but in the eyes of the Spartans, it was necessary. Only the strong could bear the weight of Sparta's destiny. The survivors would one day stand shield to shield in defense of their homeland, and there could be no weakness among them. At 7 years old, the boys were taken from their families and enrolled in the Agoge, the ruthless Spartan training system. The Agoge was not merely a school, it was a crucible. The boys learned to fight, to endure, to survive hunger, pain, and cold. They were taught to steal to feed themselves, but if caught, the punishment was severe. It wasn't the theft that was wrong, it was being caught. For in war, failure meant death. Nights were spent under the open sky, without blankets, without comfort. The boys slept on beds of reeds they cut themselves. They fought one another, sometimes until bones broke, until blood painted the ground. Weakness was mocked, fear was beaten out of them, and slowly, over years of discipline and agony, boys became men who felt no fear of pain, no pity in battle, and no mercy for enemies. Among them rose legends, the men whose names echoed through the centuries. Leonidas, who would one day stand with 300 warriors against an empire. But before he was a king, he was a child of the Agoge, forged in the same fire as the rest. The same hunger, the same pain, the same unbreakable will. The Spartans believed that a warrior's greatest honor was not to live, but to die well. They were taught that retreat was shameful, that surrender was a stain no blood could wash away. A Spartan's shield was sacred not because it protected him, but because it protected the man beside him. When they marched to war, they marched as one living organism, each man a cell in the body of Sparta. Their armor gleamed bronze under the sun of the crimson cloaks, the crested helmets, the round shields emblazoned with the Greek letter lambda, the mark of Laconia. When their phalanx advanced, it was like a wall of death moving forward, unbreakable, unstoppable. The sound of their marching feet was the heartbeat of discipline, the rhythm of perfection in motion. But behind that wall of bronze and discipline were men, sons, fathers, brothers, who each carrying the burden of their society's expectations. They knew no softness, no freedom of choice. To be a Spartan was both glory and curse. The very code that made them strong also stripped them of everything human. For women in Sparta, life was no less demanding. Spartan women were unlike any in Greece. They trained their bodies, learned to fight, to run, to speak their minds. They were expected to give birth to warriors, to endure pain of loss without tears. When their husbands went to war, they handed them their shields and said, "Return with it our broken bar on it." Those words were not cruel, they were sacred. They meant that a Spartan's life was worth nothing without honor. And so, generation after generation, this culture of strength, this machine of war, continued. Their enemies feared them, their allies respected them, and even their rivals, the Athenians, who acknowledged their unmatched discipline. Yet, beneath the legend, there was always the question, at what cost? The greatest test of the Spartan spirit came in 480 BCE, at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans faced the massive Persian army of Xerxes. The Persians outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. The earth trembled under the weight of soldiers and horses. But Leonidas did not falter. His men did not flee. They stood, their shields locked, their spears braced, their eyes burning with defiance. For 3 days, the Spartans held the line. Wave after wave of Persian warriors crashed against Thema and broke. Arrows darkened the sky, swords clashed, the screams of the dying echoed through the mountain pass. Yet still they stood. When Xerxes demanded they lay down their weapons, Leonidas answered with 2 words that would echo for eternity: Melanlabia, come and take them. It was more than defiance, it was the very essence of Spartan belief. To fight against impossible odds, to face certain death without fear, to die not as victims but as symbols of unyielding strength. Even when betrayed, even when surrounded, they fought to the last man. Their sacrifice bought Greece time. Time to unite, to fight back, to ultimately defeat the Persian invasion. Thermopylae became legend. The 300 became immortal. Yet for the Spartans, it was not about glory, it was duty. Leonidas and his men did what they were born to do. But the untold story goes beyond Thermopylae. After the battle, after the songs and statues, Sparta continued to live by its brutal code. Boys still entered the Agoge, women still bore warriors. But as the centuries passed, the very strength that had made Sparta powerful began to erode it from within. Their society had no room for art, for philosophy, for innovation. While Athens flourished with thinkers and builders, Sparta remained frozen in its own image, a warrior state trapped in the past. Their helots, the enslaved population who worked the fields, began to rise in resentment. Rebellions brewed. The Spartan army crushed them. But each victory drained something deeper, a sense of purpose, a spark of humanity. The world around them changed. Other Greek cities embraced democracy, trade, and exploration. Sparta remained rigid, proud, unbending. Eventually, even the greatest warriors fire not by the sword of others, but by the weight of their own walls. When Thebes rose against them at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, Sparta's invincible phalanx finally broke. The Spartan myth cracked, and the age of the perfect warrior began to fade. Yet, even in defeat, the legend endured. To this day, we speak of Spartan courage, Spartan discipline, Spartan resolve. Their name has become a symbol, a word that defines endurance, sacrifice, and unyielding strength. But if you listen closely to history, beneath the echo of shields and war cries, you can hear something else. The silence of the men who lived that life. The unspoken cost of perfection. Imagine, for a moment, standing in the armor of a Spartan. The metal burns your skin under the sun. Your body aches from endless training. You've never known tenderness, never known freedom. You are a weapon and nothing more, nothing less. And yet, deep inside, a voice whispers, was it worth it? That voice is the untold story. The story of the boy who survived the Agoge but never saw his mother again. The story of the man who stood in the phalanx knowing his death would come, but fearing to show it. The story of a civilization that reached the pinnacle of strength by sacrificing the very things that make life worth living. Even their enemies, after defeating them, stood in awe. The Romans admired them. The philosophers wrote of them. The poets turned their lives into verses. And though Sparta's city now lies in ruins, their legacy breathes in every soldier who refuses to give up, in every soul that chooses discipline over comfort, in every heart that stands unbroken against the impossible. Because the true power of the Spartans was never just in their spears or shields. It was in their minds. Their unshakable belief that honor was greater than fear, that duty outweighed desire, that one life meant nothing compared to the greatness of the whole. They were the embodiment of a single, immortal idea, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Centuries have passed. Empires have risen and fallen. But the story of the Spartans remains etched into stone, whispered through generations, burning in the hearts of those who dream of strength. They remind us that greatness demands sacrifice, that freedom, even when born from blood, must be earned through the courage to stand when all others fall. So when you hear the word Spartan, don't think only of warriors in red cloaks and shining armor. Think of the children taken from their mothers. Think of the men who faced death without hesitation. Think of the women who sent their sons to war and never cried. Think of the silence that followed victory, the silence of a people who lived only to serve, and died only to be remembered. The untold story of the Spartan warriors is not just a tale of war. It's a mirror held up to humanity. It shows what we are capable of when we push beyond limits and what we lose when we forget compassion in the pursuit of strength. Sparta was not perfect. It was brutal, unyielding, and often merciless. But from its ashes came lessons that still shape us. The discipline of soldiers, the pride of nations, the idea that one must be ready to fight for what one believes. So these are the echoes of Sparta. And perhaps, somewhere deep within every human being, there remains a spark of that same fire or voice that says, stand, fight, do not yield. That is the spirit of the Spartans. That is the legacy that refuses to die. The world may forget the names of kings and conquerors, but it will never forget the courage of those who stood when standing meant certain death. That is why the Spartan warriors are not just figures of the past, they are symbols of the eternal struggle between fear and bravery, between weakness and will, between mortality and immortality. In the end, the Spartans teach us that true strength does not lie in how long you live, but in what you stand for before you fall. They may have been born for war, but their legacy lives for peace. Their bodies may have turned to dust, but their spirit became the foundation of an idea that will outlive every empire. So remember them not just as fighters, but as a reminder of what it means to be human, to strive, to suffer, to rise again. The untold story of the Spartan warriors is the story of every soul that ever chose honor over comfort, courage over fear, and sacrifice over surrender. Because somewhere, in the heartbeat of history, their shields still gleam, their march still echoes, and their courage unbroken, unyielding still calls to us all.